Okay, we'll begin now. So good afternoon, good morning, good evening, participants. You're welcome to this side event, a plug during a pandemic, how to increase the resilience against the desert locust outbreak. This event is being held virtually at the World Food Prize 2020 International Borlaug, and we would like to welcome all our global audience to this event, where we are going to explore the topic of the desert locust in greater detail. To put this in perspective, around 20 million people in Africa, the whole of Africa, are facing acute food insecurity. And this is data according to the FAO, or Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations. And this is largely due to the desert locust outbreak and has been further exacerbated by the COVID-19 crisis. For Kenya, it is the worst infestation in 70 years and the worst outbreak for Somalia and Ethiopia in 25 years. So it's been a major crisis in the Horn of Africa. We do know that locusts and the grasshoppers on a regular basis do decimate crops in many parts of Africa. And of course, they cause serious damage when they do invade in farms, which range from many millions. And this puts livelihoods and food security at severe risk. To put this in perspective, a single swarm can cover up to 1 square kilometers and can contain up to 80 million locusts and can eat about the same amount of food in one day up as 35,000 people can consume. So it's quite dramatic, the kind of damage that locusts can do. Since the locust crisis began, the FAO, the national governments, and CABI and various private sector partners have been stepping up the fight against these crop-devouring insects, using various technologies such as biological control and trying to explore the use of drones as well for management of the desert locust. So this side event is going to be a 1-hour discussion that's going to feature some of the key stakeholders who are involved in the desert locust control activities within East Africa. They are going to include representatives from Ministry of Agriculture, Livestock, Fisheries and Cooperatives in Kenya, the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations, CABI and Elephant Vert. The speakers will start this session by giving some prepared statements about what they are doing in terms of desert locust management in the country or globally, wherever they are working. And then we shall open up the room to questions from the audience. The goal of this session is to communicate the urgent need for a comprehensive and coordinated response to desert locusts, particularly due to the COVID-19 crisis. And as we begin, there are just a few notices that I'd like to mention. Please keep your microphones muted if you can. And when you need to ask a question, kindly use the Zoom chat function for posing the questions to the speakers. And when asking the questions, kindly provide your name, your affiliation, and the region where you're calling your texting from so that you can know the kind of audience we have. So to begin with, I'd like to introduce our guests today. Our panelists will be Professor Hamadi Boga. Professor Boga is the Principal Secretary, State Department for Crop Development and Agriculture Research in Kenya's Ministry of Agriculture, Livestock, Fisheries and Cooperatives. Professor Boga coordinates the effort by the Kenyan government to combat the desert locust. He has a long and distinguished career in academia with an interest in agricultural sciences, microbiology, and molecular biology, as well as desert locust management. And he has been in academia prior to joining the Ministry of Agriculture. Our other panelist will be Keith Cressman. Keith is the Senior Locust Forecasting Officer at the United Nations Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations, based in Rome. As FAO's top expert on locusts, he has been providing early warning, forecasts, and advice to countries for the past 33 years to mitigate against desert locust outbreaks. And our other panelist will be Yann MIEGE. Yann MIEGE is the International Sales Director at Elephant Vert, where he supervises with his team the major key accounts. With solid international experience of over 20 years in the agriculture sector, he has worked in several renowned companies in Africa and around the world before joining Elephant Vert in 2014. And he's one of the private sector actors that are putting up a fight against desert locusts in the region. To begin this session, we'll open it up by some remarks from our panelists, and I'll invite Keith Cressman to start us off. And Keith, maybe to start us off in your remarks, you can just make a few comments about the global picture of desert locusts across the region, how all this has evolved, some aspects about the desert locust berry of some of our listeners who don't know much about it, and then some highlights about the support that F was giving to countries to mitigate the plague. Okay, over to you.
Thank you very much, and thank you to the organizers for arranging this very interesting dialogue. So let me try to set the stage then for our discussions. We are now facing the worst desert locust situation in 25 years in the Horn of Africa and in 70 years in Kenya. Now, as we are speaking, there are more desert locust swarms forming in northeastern Ethiopia, northern Somalia. That could again threaten Kenya later this year. So, how did this all evolve? Well, it started more than 2 years ago. There was 2 cyclones in 2018 that brought heavy rains to a very remote area of this world called the Empty Quarter, which is located in the Arabian Peninsula, roughly where the borders of Yemen, Saudi Arabia, and Oman meet. And this area is exactly what it says. It is empty. There's nothing there but towering sand dunes. So these cyclones that occurred in May of 2018, and then again 5 months later in October of 18, brought very heavy rains and extremely favorable conditions to desert locusts. This allowed locust populations to breed completely undetected and uncontrolled for 9 months. So essentially it caused an 8,000-fold increase of locust numbers. And then when conditions started to dry out, swarms formed and they moved north to the Arabian Peninsula and Southwest Asia, and then south to the Horn of Africa late last year. Now, during 2019, more than 2 million hectares were treated by the affected countries. And the situation, we're watching it very carefully, but it was not essentially out of control until December of 2019, when a cyclone brought very heavy rains to the Horn of Africa. And this tipped that situation into one that became extremely dangerous. And that's what we're facing now. Now, keep in mind, desert locusts are the worst migratory pest in the world. They have a very short life cycle of roughly 3 months. It takes 2 weeks for those eggs to hatch, and they hatch into nymphs, wingless hoppers, that essentially take about 6 weeks to develop before they become adults. And then the adults take about 4 weeks before they're ready to lay eggs and start that life cycle all over again. Now, adults as swarms, they fly during the day, and they can fly up to 150 kilometers in a single day. They can easily cross the Red Sea, the Gulf of Aden, the Indian Ocean for long distance migrations. Now, with each generation of breeding, there's a 20-fold increase in locust numbers. So that means after 3 months, there's 20 times the number of locusts that were started with. After 6 months, that becomes 400 times. After 9 months, 8,000 times. So if we consider that, there's been about 8 generations of breeding during this upsurge so far, that represents a 25 trillion fold increase in locust numbers. Now, what happens when this occurs? It means, that locusts form very large swarms. For example, earlier this year in northern Kenya, there was a swarm that was roughly the size of Luxembourg. It was 24 kilometers wide by about 60 kilometers in length. So what do you do in this situation? Normally we have ground control teams that can attack, small numbers of locusts, in small infestations. But obviously, when they're in very large numbers, like, a swarm the size of Luxembourg, ground control is not going to work. So aircraft are required, and they're spraying, chemical control, chemical compounds, as well as biological pesticides. Now, these compounds that are being used in desert locust control are in very kind of specific technique. It's what we call ultra low volume spraying. So this means that, national teams must be treating desert locusts and not farmers. Now, why would that be? It's because, of course, the teams need to be well trained. They need to have the right equipment. They need to use the correct pesticide, and of course, be properly prepared in terms of safety equipment. Now, what have we been doing about this problem? Which is probably, you know, the last question I want to address. So first is that FAO in early 2019, appealed to the international community for about $70 million. And 1 month later, we made an appeal for $150 million. And in May, that figure doubled to more than $311 million. So why are we asking for money? We're asking, of course, to have the necessary funds and the resources for upscaling the very important control operations. So far, we have received the majority of these funding that has been requested. Nearly 1 million hectares have been treated in 10 countries since January as a result of this. Over 500 billion locusts have been killed. Control operations have averted the loss of an estimated 1.5 metric tons of cereal just in the Horn of Africa alone. This is enough to feed 10 million people for 1 year, and is worth about $500 million. Now, control in arid and semi-arid lands have also allowed nearly 685,000 pastoral and agro-pastoral households to spray and to enjoy adequate access to the grazing areas. The livelihoods of 13 million people have been protected. And in addition to that, over 100,000 households have been provided with livelihoods assistance by August. And the number will double by the end of this month. So these achievements take even more significance, if you think about it, in a region that hosts 4 countries among the 10 worst food crises, and are now also facing the triple threat of floods from the heavy rains of the last season, desert locusts, and COVID-19 impacts. So with that brief overview, I would like to stop and hand it back over to the organizers, please.
Thank you, Keith, for that summary about the global picture for the desert locust. I'll now switch to Professor Boga. Prof, since December 2019, when the desert locust was first detected in Kenya, what has been Kenya's experience? What has the government been doing to control the menace? And what's the current situation? What has been achieved? And how is the war being won? Just give us some insights of how Kenya is coping with the desert locust crisis.
Thank you very much, organizers. As the desert locust situation was unfolding in the Middle East, and in alerts, mostly through the media and through the internet, telling us that there could be a situation with the desert locust and we should prepare. But no one told us how to prepare, because we had seen this kind of situation last 70 years ago. In 2007, we had had a small invasion, but just at the Horn of Kenya. And because there was political turmoil at that time, nobody really took notice of it. So every time we talked to the experts who were handling this area, they said we are aware. By the time it reached Somalia, we were aware of it, and we could read the FAO reports that this thing could threaten Kenya, but we still were not sure what being prepared meant. And so I kept on asking. They said we have the chemicals, we have the Desert Locust Control Organization aeroplanes there to spray, because they had done that in 2007 and they had managed to control. Only to realize on 28th December that what we were expecting was much bigger, because the swarms, when they started coming, there were many swarms. So So I think the lessons from there, I think even if a pest has not been around for a long time, you still need to maintain the knowledge base, the capacity to understand such a phenomena so that people do not get surprised. And the swarms mostly came from the Somalia side in waves, and they caused a lot of panic among the herders and the counties in the northeastern Kenya. And by its peak, it had reached 28 counties out of the 47 counties in Kenya. So it was all over Kenya, basically, including some places where we didn't expect them to go. And when we looked at now carefully at the prediction maps from FAO, they had predicted the pathways very correctly. It's just that at the time we were starting to grapple with this thing, we were mainly waiting for reports from the ground saying we have seen this, and we scrambled to go there. I think early January, February, FAO came to the country, and I think that is the time we really began to understand what was ahead of us. A number of conferences were held with development partners, and the scenario was looking very bleak. But we sat with FAO and DLCO and the World Bank and the African Development Bank to develop a response plan. The plan was guided mainly by FAO, and we were able to make sure that we have enough chemicals, enough aeroplanes, enough protective equipment, enough trained personnel to mop up everything from aerial control to ground control to surveillance. Some of the technologies that FAO brought on board were quite innovative, like the locust 3M, which was a mobile app that we trained the scouts to track the locusts and be able to report. And from there, we could get quite accurate forecast map. Of course, we had to get weather information to see where the winds would go so that we could align the assets accordingly. So we created bases across the landscape that were responding to different situations. We trained the counties. We trained our National Youth Service. We had like 500 National Youth Servicemen trained and deployed to the ground with PPEs and with the handheld sprayers. And I think because of that, we were able to contain the situation because we were able to kill them when they were still young, flying, and also kill them when they were at the larval stage and they were crawling on the ground. At the different instances, we were able to also send teams to control them. I think the biggest challenge that I could see was that the area was very remote where we were operating, and sometimes you had to fly long distances to the areas where the swarms were. But the forecast maps were very useful, and the communities down there were very supportive. Out of the lessons, out of the effort, we were able to avert a re-invasion of Somalia from Kenya. At least that one, we managed to control most of the swarms. At one time, we were dealing with over 500 swarms, and we managed to control that. We even managed to limit the migration to southern Sudan and into Uganda. And as we stand, we have one small swarm somewhere in about 500 hectares, somewhere in Samburu. Today there was a report of a swarm in Marsabit, but largely they are under control. This last swarm, which we hope will be the last, was sprayed with a biopesticide, but because the temperatures are very low, it has taken long to sort of be affected, but we are monitoring it, and hopefully once that is done, now we will focus on what is happening in the region because we know that they'll come again. One of the biggest challenges we had during this time was, of course, the capacity of the people, which FAO took care of to train us, and also access to chemicals and PPEs and even aeroplanes, because not everybody has an aeroplane with ULV sprayers. And it's very hard to get ULV sprayers for ground control. You have to, FAO had to bring in some from West Africa, where the problem is more recurrent, before we could get our own and do the spraying. So that has been a major challenge. And then when COVID happened, we had to declare locust control an emergency and as an essential service so that the people could get access to all the places where the locusts are and work even during curfew hours and also not be controlled by the blockades. But the biggest challenge was to get chemicals in because we realized we don't manufacture these chemicals locally or even the PPEs. You have to order them. And the time you order them, that is when the manufacturer orders them also. So that was a major bottleneck. But we also got donations from FAO, from Bayer, from the Chinese government of chemicals. Although they were not coming at the time you wanted them. There were delays, there were gaps, and so there were a lot of frustrations. But in the end, we managed to do the job because we understood the life cycle of the locusts, and we understood if you can't get them here, you will still get them at the next stage. So the key is making sure that you have enough scouts there and they are reporting, and that we use the data to track and execute our operations. And I really appreciate the efforts of all the people who have contributed to this, what I see as a success. And I think going into the future, we have gotten funding from the World Bank to enable us set up a center for managing migratory pests, including locusts, fall armyworm, and the others, so that the capacity is always there, whether the pest is this one or the other one, but the capacity is there and people are trained on a continuous basis. And next time we don't have a surprise. So let me stop there. I hope I've been able to cover. So even the COVID did not stop our fight. We continued with the fight because we declared it as an essential service and everybody expected us to continue with the work. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Prof. I would like to come to you now, Yann. You've had the brief from the Permanent Secretary. You talked about biopesticide, and Elephant Vert is in the business of biological pest control products for management of common or major insect pests. And I just want you to just give us some insights on how the development of biological control for desert locust has been, the role of the product that Elephant Vert has for desert locust control, and give us some experiences in countries where this product has been tried. And you can also let us know if use of biopesticide will be a silver bullet for Africa to manage desert locust.
Okay, thank you for the invitation, and it's a great pleasure to be here. Maybe I will just start with some few words on Elephant Vert. Elephant Vert in English is the green elephant, and so why elephant? It's because our original focus was Africa, and it's still Africa. We have 6 subsidiaries in Africa. Now we are also developing ourselves in Europe, but this was the original focus. And green because our mission is to provide to the farmers some alternative to the chemical. So for us, it was, and saying that we are we are specialized in the microorganism. We are producer, we are also an R&D company, and we are acting in the fertilization, in the biostimulant, and in the biocontrol. And for us, it was clear since the beginning. So we started the company it was 8 years ago now. It was clear and key to have a biocontrol product for the locust. Why? Because in a lot of countries, the locust and the grasshopper are an annual concern for the farmer. So although there's some plague, but that one are the one that we are seeing in East Africa and in India and Pakistan are quite cyclical, but annually you have some impact about the grasshopper and the locust in West Africa and in Eastern and in Central Asia, and that's why we develop some product on that. So we have currently 2 strains of Metarhizium acridum, and that has been developed in 2 products. So one is the Novacrid, the other one is the green mussel, and both of these strains are coming from an R&D program developed in the 90s. This program name was Lubilosa. It was financed by some international donator, and it was driven by CABI at the time, and the ECP and the ITEA, so two African research organizations. And they have at that time isolated quite a number of Metarhizium acridum and developed first a product, the green mussel, and later on we developed the Novacrid, and we are now both manufacturing those products and developing and distributing those products. So for the time being, we have first CABI and with the green mussel have done quite a number of trials with this product in West Africa and in Southern Africa. And then we have continued the work since 3 years now, or 4 even, in Central Asia, in Kazakhstan, in Uzbekistan, in West Africa, of course, in Nigeria and Senegal, in Morocco, in Algeria. And we have now the product registered. So in Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan, we have the product registered in West Africa. There's a common registration area named CSP. We have the registration also in Madagascar. We are under registration in Algeria. In Morocco, we just got it. Under registration also in Saudi Arabia, in Oman. And formally, the green mussel was registered also in a certain number of countries in Southern Africa, in Sudan, also in Yemen. The registration expired, so now we have to renew it. So in terms of use, I don't know if you know much about those type of products, but generally they are used in prevention. That means that with those products we are tackling the young generation, so what we call the hopper, as said Keith. So before that they become adult and before that they start to fly. So this is let's say the normal use of this kind of product. When you do the treatment, it takes 3 days after that the hopper start to be weak, and it start to die generally after 7 days. And between 16 to 21 days, you reach 90% of efficacy. But you need a certain number of days before that to die. That's why it's generally used in prevention. It's used like a pesticide chemical. That means it's spray in ULV also, so with 1 or 2 liters per hectare in ground application, or also with some aircraft by plane or by helicopter. And so during this crisis, our main challenge was to, so in terms of use, it has been largely used in the past in Madagascar, in Tanzania also. It has been used also and it's used this year in Burkina Faso, in Senegal, in Cape Vert. But with the crisis, it was the first time that it will be used as such a size, because you have to know that in Somalia, so FAO is driving the spray of more than 100,000 hectares with this product. And for us, the big challenge was, but it was not forecasted. It was we were not prepared to that. So first in East Africa, we didn't have any restriction. So in Kenya and Ethiopia, because it was not some priority country for us. Somalia, FAO succeeded to have some provisional import permit and could pass some order to us. And it happened at we were starting to deliver when the COVID crisis started. And our factory is based in Morocco. So it was really a headache at the beginning to do the delivery, because all the airports were shut down. The commercial flights were shut down. So that means that there were less and less option to carry the goods, and all the price were increasing. On the other hand, also it was impossible to have some product in. That means all the raw material, all the spare parts for the factory. So it was really a big challenge. At the end, we succeeded. It took us some time, and it certainly brought some frustration because of the delay. But it was a big achievement for us to have the product used in so large hectare in Somalia. And also now we can see there's a new crisis starting in Southern Africa, and there's a lot of interest also for such a solution to be used in Namibia or in Botswana or in Zambia. So let's say for further deployment, what will be key for us and for for the biocontrol product, it's really the prevention, because we can see that you have some country where they are more prepared, where they have some equipment. In some other country less. In general, they rely a lot on the development international donors to finance such a program. And most of the time, those type of finance are coming when the crisis is already here and already in. So that means that you have already the issue, and when the issue is there, and when the swarm already there, it starts to be difficult to be controlled even with some chemicals. So investing in the prevention will be key to develop the biocontrol, and it's really one of the takeaway message that I will to give if you have some international donor is that to finance the prevention, it will be always a win after that. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Yann. I would like to invite questions from the audience, and as you're composing your questions, I'll probably ask each of the panelists just one question, brief questions, as we wait for questions coming from the participants. So this one will go to Keith. Keith, in the current locust outbreak, we've seen greater and greater use of technology, which wasn't there before. For instance, we're starting to see the use of drones being piloted for desert locust management. CABI currently in partnership with Astro Aerial and with funding from formerly DFID and now the UK's Foreign Commonwealth and Government Office have a pilot that is looking at piloting the use of drones for control of desert locusts. Share with us some thoughts on the business case for better use of drones in desert locust management.
Yes, I think drones have the potential, of course, to improve the survey operations on the ground and also the control operations. So if I start with the survey operations, obviously the main limitation now of surveys is that it's one or just a few teams in the field to cover a very large area and try to find locusts within that large area. So here drones can help with that. FAO has been working on developing a fixed wing drone. It's a portable drone that can be used by the survey team. They can launch it in the field, and it can go out about 100 kilometers from where that team is and map the area for green vegetation and come back to the team with that map. So then this allows the teams to go check those areas of green vegetation specifically. Up until now, surveying is rather a random activity, just kind of looking around the desert for green vegetation. So the drone can map that. Once those teams are in the green vegetation, then that drone can also identify locust infestations there that might need treatment. So this is all done in the field without any internet connectivity, no computers to process the data. It's done on board. And the team itself can operate the drone. So it doesn't rely on a third-party service. And this is very important. All of the tools that we develop in FAO are for ownership and use by the national locust programs in each of the affected countries. We don't subscribe to the business model of services, contracting services by a third party, because often this may result in inferior services that might not meet the expectations of the country, and it can be very difficult to sustain, because the country then has to pay for it. So we much prefer to develop easy tools that are robust, that can be used by the country themselves, by the national survey teams whenever they need to. So unfortunately here we were a victim of COVID-19. All of this drones are ready to go with the team to be deployed to train the national teams how to use and maintain the drones. We're now just waiting for those travel restrictions to open up to allow that to occur. Now, just very briefly, for control, let's put the cards on the table. Nobody in the world knows how to control desert locusts safely and effectively and efficiently with a drone. So here there is still work to be done. And this work and this field testing is very important because we are dealing with poisons. We're dealing with pesticides. So, the margin of error is very, very tight. We don't want to be making mistakes, because if mistakes happen, then of course you can have negative consequences on human health and on the environment. So here, again, there's a lot of companies that are professing to know how to treat desert locusts with drones, but this is simply not the case. So more work is needed to be done in partnership with people like CABI, with FAO, and with the affected countries, so that we can come up with a standard set of operating procedures and with guidelines in order to allow countries to safely and effectively control locusts with drones. But always remember, drones are going to be a more expensive solution than ground vehicles and aircraft. Aircraft can cover a much larger area, and ground vehicle spraying is much cheaper. So drones do have an advantage in those areas that those two platforms cannot reach, such as treetops, difficult to spray from the ground, too small to spray by an aircraft, or inaccessible areas. So, these are good case examples of the use of drones for desert locust control, but still is too early at the moment. We need more testing. Let's take advantage of those current infestations that are present now to do that essential testing.
Thank you, Keith. Professor Boga, it is 10 months down the road. We still have desert locusts in Kenya. What, in your view, has been the shortcomings and some lessons learned from the current desert response by the government of Kenya?
I think the biggest shortcoming is that at the beginning we didn't have enough chemicals. We took a long time to respond because from end of December, by the time it took like 3-4 weeks to scramble any response, and then after that the response was very small. It wasn't to the scale. And also we assumed that maybe within 3 months it would be gone. But later on we were relying on the forecast from Keith and team there. We saw it would go up to July, but it now has stretched up to now. The conditions have been superb, especially rainfall in the north. And so they have stayed around because there's enough food there to feed. They don't have to fly into the desert. So that has been part of the challenge. The initial capacity was small. Now we are up to capacity. And then the fact that the weather has been very favorable for these guys to keep hovering around. But I think once we had gotten into the groove, we really went out of our way to recover what had been the setbacks. But I think COVID, when it came the way it did with the restrictions, sometimes we had companies with chemicals stuck in Japan for like 3-4 months. Some of the chemicals ordered in January were arriving in July. So we relied a lot on FAO to also give us alternative molecules that we could look. So what we did, we looked for any alternative molecule that could do the job in the country, and we would ask FAO and our Pest Control Product Board whether this works. So these delays in making decisions are the ones that sort of were the setback. But I think now that we are going into building an institution that will have the knowledge, that will have the ICT capacity, that will have the people, we hope the next attack will be better reacted to. Right now we have a stockpile of chemicals and equipment, and we know who is providing quality aircraft for spraying. Before, when we started, we didn't know, we were groping, and we really appreciate the advice of FAO. And we're in the process of probably coming up with a commission for the region that combines Somalia, ourselves, and Ethiopia, and Uganda and South Sudan, probably Tanzania, so that in future we are better coordinated. Yeah.
Thank you. Yann, you've heard from Professor Boga about some of the supply chain challenges that Kenya faced to get products for desert locust control in the country. Now, Elephant Vert is the sole, producer and distributor of green muscle globally. So what are some of the challenges that you faced being a sole distributor of this product and making it more available to countries that need it?
As I said, at the beginning, we are not, let's say, East Africa was not in a part of our priority, so we haven't done some registration work there. So it was, the first one is to have the, before talking about supply product, is to have the product register. And as Professor said, Kenya has not been eating like this since 70 years. So it was, Kenya was not part of our objective, and Ethiopia was, but in the second step. So now we are working, and thanks to the FAO to get the product registered in those countries. It's the first one. And then in terms of supply, we have so in Elephant Vert we have 3 factories. One is dedicated to the virus and based in Kenya. Another one is based in France for the bacteria, the PGPR bacteria, and the last one is for the microfungi, and it's in Morocco. And this factory is not only for the Metarhizium acridum, because we are producing also some other strain for the biocontrol market, and for some partner, we are doing some B2B business. So we are producing for other one. So we had to do some dedicated line and to increase our capacity to be able to respond. And what we are trying to do is to build some safety stock. So it's what we have done at the beginning, but it was not enough to react quickly. And now we are trying to have, let's say, for example, for 2021, to have a first view at least, and to align our production to that. Also, what we are considering is to have to use Kenya also as a second base to produce some microfungi. So it's not yet it's part of the project, but at least to have 2 different places where we can be able to react and to have some safety stock.
Okay, thank you. We'll now start taking questions from the audience. We have quite a number, so I'll ask the panelists to be brief and responsive so that we can take in as many questions as possible. And I'll start with Keith. One of the participants was interested in your discussion around how the prices evolved. And they're asking if there are any ways to control the breeding grounds for locusts in the Arabian Peninsula.
Yes, the Arabian Peninsula normally is fairly easy to control the locusts there, because you have well-equipped countries, Oman, Yemen, and Saudi Arabia. And this is, of course, if the locusts don't appear in the empty quarter, which is really difficult. Now, the great challenge of the Arabian Peninsula is Yemen, because Yemen now has protracted conflict for the last 4 or 5 years. Throughout this upsurge, there's been exceptionally good rains that have not really stopped in the country for 2 years. So it has become a reservoir of desert locusts, simply because that conflict doesn't allow those survey and control teams to get in the field and to do their work.
Okay, question for Yann. Someone is asking if the pesticide can be effective against the adult, and what is the shelf life of the pesticide? Can it be stockpiled for use in subsequent incursions?
Yes, I will start with the shelf life first. So the study that we have done for the registration dossier is that the product can be stored for 2 years at a normal temperature condition, but normal it's 20 degrees, so it's not our recommendation. Our recommendation is to store the product at 4 degrees. If you store it at 4 degrees, you can use it 2 years later, even more. But WHO said that it's 2 years for the general pesticide, but store at 4 degrees, there's no issue of less efficacy of the product. And after that, the first one regarding the efficacy on the adult. We have some efficacy on the product. I think it's the same, but the difficulty is that the swarm are moving quite fast, and you want to be sure that the adult has been touched by have eaten or been touched by the spore, and after that how to control, because how to measure them, because you know that they will start to die after 7 days or at minimum, and the max will be at 21 days. So they will have moved quite a lot during that time.
Okay, this one is for you, Professor Boga. understanding the Kenyan situation and the varied landscapes and ecologies across the country, can you speculate on any reasons why we could have had an overpopulation of the locusts in Kenya up to this time, why they're not migrating and moving to other locations and have persisted in the country?
I wouldn't say we have an overpopulation. What I said at the beginning was that at its peak, we had swarms covering 28 of the counties out of the 47 counties. And these were not born and bred in Kenya. The initial invasion, there were swarms invading from either Somalia or Ethiopia. And then because of the lack of capacity, the initial generation was able to breed once in Kenya. So we had a second generation that was made in Kenya that was able to multiply. And remember, one locust gives you about 300 eggs. So we had a local generation of locusts, which we were able to contain. I don't think so far we have not had a third generation. But the conditions in Kenya, especially in northern Kenya, are very favorable, especially around Lake Turkana, parts of Samburu. Samburu is very loved by locusts. And Marsabit, where we have almost semi-desert conditions. Of course, there was breeding in other parts, especially around Kitui, and that is parts of eastern Kenya. But most of the breeding where you would say conditions are suitable are in northern Kenya, especially Marsabit, Samburu, and Turkana, because you have like semi-desert kind of conditions, and Keith can confirm this. The reason why they didn't move, usually between August and July and August and September, it's supposed to be dry. But this time around, it was not dry, so there was vegetation throughout. And because they don't migrate in vain, they migrate to look for food. If there's food around, they'll stick around. I think they stuck around for, except this wheel hovering around, but it has been sprayed with metarhizium, and we hoped it would die within 10 days. But now, because of the cold weather, the last time I checked, it is almost 16 days, is still hovering around, which also speaks to the challenge, because the metarhizium was developed for desert-like conditions. But if the temperatures drop below 20 or 30, I think the efficacy also goes down. I'm not sure, but I think that is a subject for further research and analysis, and whether we can now look for metarhizium isolates that are from these kinds of environment, because we still have the tree locusts in those environments. So maybe using the same technology, but maybe local isolates, we should be able to also look for local metarhizium isolates. I know ECP has been doing a lot of work on CABI, and probably some of the organisms in your collection could fit the bill if some experiments are done.
Thank you, Professor. A quick question for Yann. What is the residual effect of your pesticide product, and would you need to apply it multiple times in a year?
Okay. So if you have, in fact, it will depend of the vegetation on the soil. If you don't have any vegetation or very few, the spore will last for 1 or 2 weeks. That means that during this 1 or 2 weeks, all the grasshopper, all the hopper that will come will be infected. If you have some vegetation still on the field, we have some trials, for example, in Niger, and we can see some reinfestation up to 6 weeks. So yes, we have some lasting effect, even more than, for example, in Niger, the trial was again phenitrotion, so it's a common one used, and the result was better than the chemical testimony. After that, do you have to do some many trials? Yes, because many spray, because first they don't stay, and after 6 weeks you will lost your let's say the big part of the spore.
Okay, there's a question for you, Keith. Was the donor response time an issue? And assuming that the funding, the appeal that you put out there, assuming that the funding had come much quicker, would it have been much easier and much cheaper to contain the outbreak?
No, I think this is one of the lessons we learned from the last upsurge 15 years ago, that we needed to appeal to donors as early as possible, but with much larger figures. And so, you know, as soon as we determined that the situation was going into an upsurge phase, we made that appeal in January, and we made it at a tune of $70 million. Compared to 15 years ago, our first appeal was $1 million. So it's a huge difference. That appeal then was coupled with high-level missions by myself and the director of the emergency operations from Rome headquarters to the affected countries, to Kenya, Ethiopia, Somalia, to donor advocacy meetings in Geneva and in New York. And this was all done in a matter of a few weeks. And I think, you know, the combination of that timely appeal with those missions, plus we had very good media coverage, we were able to get that money very quickly. Initially, it was from our own resources, then from the UN Surf Fund, and then thereafter from the international community. So I don't think we could have done much better. The only thing we might have been able to do a bit better is probably indicate a couple weeks earlier that the situation had changed to an upsurge phase. But however, you know, that coincided with Christmas and the end of the year. So everybody was closed at that time. And even then, in hindsight, I don't think 2 weeks would have made a big difference.
Thank you. We are close to winding down. I just want to sneak in a few more questions. This is for Professor Boga. One of the listeners is asking, why don't you attract locusts with special food to trap them? And the person says that they've been eating these locusts and they ate them in Lubumbashi in the 1990s and they think they are a delicacy. So they are not bad food except when they are contaminated. So the question is, why aren't we eating the locusts in Kenya?
Yeah, because they are not found here normally. It is a once in a lifetime invasion. Mm-hmm. So we didn't have any plans for them, and we won't have, because who knows, we can put elaborate plans and then the next time they come is 70 years. So I think because it's a migratory pest, and maybe people in Ethiopia and Yemen have plans for them because they're always around there. But for us, where it just comes once in a while, I think all we need to do is make sure that we are prepared. Otherwise, we can continue eating the shenene that we are eating. It's a close relative of locusts.
So thank you, Prof. I'll stay with you for your last words. Basically, the question is that if you had to do this again, what would you do differently?
I think what I would do differently is that I would reach out to FAO much earlier. In fact, I realized that was one of the parts where I think we overlooked, because I didn't understand the capacity of FAO for this. The other thing is that I hope when it happens, there will be no COVID, because then the logistics will not be constrained. So it will not be up to me. There will be no pandemic of any form or nature to allow for movement and mobility, because those were the major constraints. The knowledge base of the pest and the COVID situation made my work very difficult and gave me sleepless nights, because when you have governors from all over calling you because the swarm has landed somewhere near a maize field and you don't have the chemical, you don't have the aircraft, that can be a nightmare. And people think you are maybe incompetent, but it's just the circumstance that makes you be a challenge.
Yeah, thank you, Prof. I'll pose the same question to you, Keith. If you had to do this again, how would you do it differently?
I think this comes back in part to the answer that Professor Boga gave. You know, it's interesting that, you know, some of our member countries still don't know the capacity of FAO in terms of locust and what we offer in terms of early warning services, but also in terms of, you know, coordinating emergency campaigns. And I think, you know, that's a learning lesson for us. We have to get that message out to our member countries so that they know that, you know, FAO is uniquely positioned in the world for these type of activities and services and assistance that we can provide to countries. In addition, of course, I think everyone needs to learn a little bit more about desert locusts. And I just internally, my own colleagues, but also countries, the world's media, hopefully, you know, education, this can be, you know, brought into the schools. So, you know, if everyone at least has a basic knowledge of desert locusts, I think then we can respond much quicker, much more sensibly, and we can reduce that panic that often is, you know, comes into a country when they're invaded.
Thanks, Keith. Yann, you can take over the same question.
Yes, I think we what we have done differently. It's maybe be more closer to the forecast and more close to what was happening in the east and in the Horn of Africa to have a better forecast of our production and get a higher stock at the beginning of the crisis. I think it's something that we should do differently.
Okay, thank you. Yes, thank you so much. At this juncture, I would like to thank our panelists so much for making the time to participate in this conversation. Thank you so much, Professor Boga, for making the time. Thank you so much, Keith, for making the time, and also for Yann. This has been a very useful conversation. I would like to say that I'd like to think that we've learned a lot about desert locusts and the responses that we are all undertaking to contain the menace. And I would like to end by saying that we certainly hope that as we contain COVID, we shall also contain the desert locusts so that we can provide better food security for our people where we do work. So thank you so much, and thanks for making the time. This is the end of our side event. Thank you.
Thank you.